Other settlers followed them from Alabama, Georgia, Kentucky, Maryland, Mississippi, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Virginia. This was the beginning of the Greenville Colored Settlement. It covered an area of 15 square miles, 12 in Ohio and 3 in Indiana. Its boundaries were Greenville-Nashville Road to the north, Hillgrove Southern Road to the east, US Highway 36 to the south, and Indiana State Route 227 to the west. The historians speculated that the settlers chose the location so that if laws were once again passed that were too restrictive for people of color, they could easily move to the other state. Decades later, the Greenville Colored Settlement wanted to establish a post office. They needed a new name for their town. They chose the name Long after James and Sarah Long, a white couple from Kansas who had purchased a blacksmith shop sight unseen. When they arrived in the settlement in 1884, they discovered it was a predominantly colored community, but they stayed and made a successful blacksmith business. Their acceptance of the town earned them the respect of its residents, and what had been referred to as the Greenville Colored Settlement became Longtown. It was primarily a farming community. The center of town was the intersection of Hollinsburg-Tampico Road and Stingley Road. There were several businesses and 900 residents. There were sawmills and gravel pits, barber shops and blacksmith shops, a Masonic lodge, a tavern, a grocery store, and a post office. There were 2 baseball teams, the Tigers and the Giants, a Longtown band, a glee club, and a temperance society. Longtown had 5 schools at various times. The first was the Clemens School, followed by the Bunker Hill School, Tampico School, Longtown School number 4, and on the Indiana side, the Union Literary Institute, which was a manual labor boarding school open to all races, established by Longtown residents and anti-slavery Quakers. The 2 religious denominations were Wesleyan and African Methodist Episcopal, or AME. 3 cemeteries were named after the first 3 founding families of the settlement: the Clemens Cemetery, the Bass Cemetery, and on the Indiana side, the Alexander Cemetery. Longtown was a multiracial community. Its racial mix included Black, Indian, Irish, Danish, German, and Dutch. It has been documented as a triracial community based on its Black, white, and Indian heritage. However, its residents identified mainly with their Black heritage, and Longtown was known as the primary colored settlement in both Randolph County, Indiana, and Darke County, Ohio. The Underground Railroad was a network of safe houses that aided fugitive slaves as they made their way toward freedom in Canada. After crossing the Ohio River, 3 routes brought them north. These 3 routes converged at the home of Levi and Catherine Coffin, Quaker abolitionists in Newport, Indiana, now Fountain City. 3 routes left there, all heading north. The northeastern route came first through Longtown, where many Longtown families were leaders in the abolitionist movement. Fugitive slaves often stayed in the settlement for a time and studied at the Union Literary Institute on the Indiana side before going further north. Employment opportunities in the larger cities caused Longtown's population to dwindle to 500 by the 1940s, 175 by the 1950s, and 10 farm families by the 1990s. Today, the physical evidence of Longtown that remain are several early homes in various levels of disrepair, the Bethel Long Church, Longtown School number 4, now the Community Center alongside the Union Literary Institute. But it was not the buildings that made Longtown's history so extraordinary. It was those former slaves, free people of color, and people of mixed race who came to that location 202 years ago and purchased their own land for the very first time. They cleared that land, planted and harvested it, built farmsteads on it, and raised families on it. They built a settlement based on a foundation of tolerance and acceptance, where hard work and cooperation were necessities, and where a love for God and a respect for education were priorities. Now they rest there, many in the cemeteries they created, and many on the very land they owned and farmed. Longtown means different things to different people. To me, it is a success story. Within the boundaries of those 15 square miles were 900 people of different races and backgrounds from 10 different southern states who worked together, lived together, and worshiped together. And they made it all work for over a century. It is an example of what is possible. Longtown was made up of ordinary people who did extraordinary things. Many of them became ministers, doctors, teachers, college professors, college deans, president of Wilberforce. They were prosperous farmers, accomplished athletes, actors, actresses, and musicians. Some even dared to be the first black intern in Harlem hospitals, the first black elected to the House of Representatives, the first black senator who completed the unfinished term of Jefferson Davis, and of course the two men who were the first men of color to purchase land in Randolph County, Indiana, and Dare County, Ohio. Longtown also had many heroes. Some of them were everyday heroes. Those individuals ready and willing to help anyone in need, like those who would tend to a sick neighbor, help deliver a baby, or help bury a loved one. Like those farmers who shared their farm equipment with their neighbors and helped them bring in their crops. When a smallpox epidemic struck a Longtown family and took 2 of their children, Longtown neighbors stepped in and brought food and water and clothing and firewood to the family while their house was under quarantine. When a Longtown resident was building a home for his family, he died suddenly before it was finished. His Longtown neighbor stepped in and finished the cabin for his widow and children. When the Longtown church burned to the ground, Longtown neighbors stepped in and quickly rebuilt it. That building today holds church services every Sunday. When fugitive slaves came through the settlement, Longtown families sheltered them, fed them, and took them further on their journey towards Canada, where they were in search of freedom. And then there were those extraordinary heroes who marched off to join the United States military, ready and willing to fight to defend the right to that same freedom for everyone. And those are the heroes we are here to honor today, the military heroes of Longtown. Let me introduce you to just a few of them. On the eve of the Civil War, there were 200,000 free and 1.6 million enslaved men of color between the ages of 15 and 40 living in the United States. By the end of the war, 178,985 had fought to preserve the Union. Of those, 135,000 were former slaves, and 37,300 of them died in battle from their wounds or from disease. At the beginning of the war, former slaves had run to Union Army camps seeking freedom and refuge, but they were not allowed to be soldiers. They were considered contrabands of war. But Abraham Lincoln revised the Militia Act in 1862, allowing these contraband slaves to be used as the Army saw fit, which was usually digging fortifications and cooking and cleaning, and allowing free men of color to become soldiers. In 1863, the Bureau of Colored Troops was formed, and by the end of the war, 166 regiments were composed entirely of enlisted men of color. One of the earliest and best known regiments of the United States Colored Troops was the Massachusetts 54th. This unit was developed by abolitionists like Frederick Douglass, whose two sons also served in the regiment. This regiment story was told in the movie Glory, where it showed the frontal assault attack that this company did on Fort Wagner. This battle resulted in the loss of 40% of their regiment. Serving in this regiment was James Monroe Rickman, my third great-grandfather, whose family had come to Longtown from Tennessee. His obituary states that he is said to have been the first colored man from the South, where he was born a slave, to enlist as a federal soldier. After the war, James Monroe came home, married, worked in a tile yard for 10 years, and died at his home on Water Street here in Greenville. The 45th Pennsylvania Regiment was a regiment that included many Longtown men: Zachariah Archie, John Holland, Charles Mason, Charles McCown, William McCown, Levi Schaefer, George Reed, and Henry Stokes. This unit fought at Petersburg and Richmond. They were in pursuit of Lee's army from April 3rd to April 9th, 1865. They were present at Appomattox to see Lee surrender to Grant, and after the war, they served in the Mexican frontier and were discharged from Brownsville, Texas. In this unit was Zebedee Bass, who was the grandson of Reuben and Polly Bass, my third great-grandparents, who came from North Carolina to Longtown. Zebedee was a student and later a trustee at the Union Literary Institute. He was a farmer and a member of Longtown's large threshing ring. Also in this regiment was Commodore Perry Clemens, son of James and Sophia Clemens, who came to Longtown from Virginia. Commodore Perry was a early minister of the Wesleyan Church and was listed as a principal resident of the settlement in the 1882 history of Randolph County. He was a private in Company A and was later a first sergeant in the Grand Army of the Republic. Also in this unit was Reuben Goins, son of Henry and Anna Goins, also my third great-grandparents, who came from South Carolina to Longtown. At the age of 8, Reuben was sent to live with and work for Benjamin Stanton, a doctor and fellow abolitionist friend of Levi Coffin's in Newport, Indiana. Reuben often accompanied Stanton to the Coffin home and listened to the stories of the fugitives. He vowed that when he became an adult, he would do what he could to help them. As a teenager, he drove false bottom wagons from the Coffin house to Longtown, where many families sheltered them, and Reuben also took them further north. At one point, he went to Canada to see how the people he had helped were faring, and stayed for over a year working on a boat and the Canadian Southern Railroad. He eventually returned to Longtown and helped build the Union Literary Institute and was a lifetime trustee. The James R. Clemens, grandson of James and Sophia, also served in the Company A of the 8th Regiment Richard Goins, brother of Reuben Goins, served in Company G of the 13th Regiment, which fought at Vicksburg and Chattanooga. Their nickname was First at Vicksburg. They were the first unit to place Union colors on a Confederate position. This company was led by General Sherman and Captain Phil Sheridan. The 127th Regiment fought at Fair Oaks and Chaffin's Farm and included Andrew J. Patterson, who died at the age of 85 at the Dayton Soldiers Home, and Benjamin Silas Wade, who ran a grocery store at the corner of Tampico Road and US 36 until 1924, and he died at the age of 88. Benjamin Wade is one of the men pictured in Civil War uniforms that was photographed in the newspaper. Longtown made quite a contribution to the Civil War. Over 80 men from Longtown joined the United States Colored Troops. At least 40 of them are buried in the 3 Longtown cemeteries. The Union Literary Institute on the Indiana side closed its doors during the Civil War because so many men were gone. And we must remember that those that I mentioned today are the ones that returned. They did not all return. World War II was fought from 1914 to 1918, and Cloyd Clemens served in the Army during World War I. He was a student at Greenville High School and was a star athlete, lettering in baseball, basketball, football, and track. He played on independent football and baseball teams, and he was the manager of the Longtown Tigers baseball team, where his nickname was Cap Clemens. There is a stone placed beside his headstone in the Clemens Cemetery that says presented in honor of Cap Clemens from the old and the new Tigers baseball team. Also serving in World War I was Chester Goins, who served as a cook in the Coast Guard. He served on several Coast Guard cutters whose job it was to do homeland security and search and rescue. He enlisted at Newport News, Virginia, and was discharged from Baltimore, Maryland. World War II was fought from 1939 to 1945, and during World War II, Jack Collins served in the United States Army. He was awarded the Silver Star Medal, which was the 3rd highest combat decoration for gallantry in action. His company was on a hillside in Korea, and he was wounded by enemy artillery fire. He refused to be evacuated and returned to the hillside because he knew that his company had already suffered many casualties. He was wounded a second time and spent some time in the Tokyo hospital. He also was awarded the Purple Heart. In looking at the list of soldiers on this exhibit, I was struck by the number of families that have multiple names on it. One of those families was the Hurd family. Richard Hurd served in the Army during World War II. Twins Don and Dean Hurd served in the Army during the Korean War, and Ralph Hurd served in the Army during the Vietnam era. Ralph served was a member of Charlie Company of the Old Guard, which was a ceremonial unit in Washington, D.C., who conducted military funerals at Arlington, guarded the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, and conducted ceremonies in D.C. Ralph served as a cook in this unit, and he also helped conduct the military funerals. He was honored to serve as the military escort for John F. Kennedy's – inauguration parade. So another family was the Jett family. Daniel Jett served in the Army in World War II. Benjamin Jett, or Benny as we knew him, served in the Army in the Korean War. And Joseph Jett served 18 years in the Air Force during the Korean War and the Vietnam War. Their cousin, James Jett, served in the 1312th Army Engineers Division of the, it was a general service regiment. He was sent for training on heavy equipment in Australia. And then he served in New Guinea and the Philippines in the Pacific Asiatic Theater. His job was to build highways and runways. He was sent out on a bulldozer alone with 1 rifle and 3 bullets to do this job. He could hear gunfire in the distance and could hear incoming planes, not knowing till the last minute if they were a friend or foe. Most of the men I'm discussing today are no longer with us, but James Jett will celebrate his 99th birthday this April. Another family was the Spicer brothers, who were 5 brothers who served in 4 branches of the service during 3 different wars. Duty to God and country was important to Longtown families, which is obvious with the number of names on this plaque that are from the same family. There were 10 families so far that have multiple listings. These that I have introduced to you today are only a few of the military heroes of Longtown. There are many more who lived on the Indiana side of the settlement, and many more who are yet to be researched. We thank them all for their service. I speak on Longtown's history often, and it is always my honor to do so. I end each speech with this sentiment. Many cultures believe that each person dies twice. The first time is when they draw their last breath. The second is the last time their name is spoken. So it is so important to speak their names and tell their stories and preserve their history. Our ancestors witnessed history, they were part of history, and they made history. And then they entrusted it to us, their descendants, to protect, to honor, and to share. Because when we share our stories, we continue to give them life. This exhibit will stand in the military section of Garst Museum, and for years to come, people will visit here, they will see this exhibit, they will read these names, and they will speak these names. And so as a Longtown descendant myself, and speaking on behalf of all the Longtown descendants in the audience, I want to say to Garst Museum, Larry Lewis, and Dave Mangus, that we appreciate this honor more than we can possibly say, and I appreciate yet another opportunity today to speak some of these names once again. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everyone. This microphone's not cooperating. I do not sound as great as she does. I came here today to speak mostly about the military members from Longtown. And funny that in my life I have found that I am related to a lot of these members that have come out of Longtown. So to start, I guess a little bit about me and how I grew up in Longtown. I was born in Greenville, and then we ended up moving out to 467 Stingley Road, which happens to be the old Clemens farmstead. We lived out there for many years. My mother remarried, and my stepfather joined the military and we left, but we always came back to the same place, 467 State Road. An old drafty house that we all hated because it was always cold, but it wasn't until much later that I realized the importance, the history of that building. As a child, I remember my mother talking about it being the Underground Railroad, and I never understood that. So many times I went down to the basement looking for the railroad that didn't exist. So I was like, yeah, my mom's pulling a chain. I don't get it. So obviously many years later, I started understanding what the Underground Railroad is, and I started to realize the significance of that home. Later, I learned, more of the history, how the Clements came. And again, these are all names I knew. Todd Clements, he was my cousin, went to school with him. The Burdens, my grandmother's maiden name was Burden, Carolyn Burden. So all of these names aren't new to me. So hearing all these names, I'm like, this is crazy. I related all of this history. So I started doing a little bit of digging, started learning a lot about it. So with that being said, moving on. I did join the military in 1993. At the age of 17, I signed up to join, actually that would have been 1992. Went to basic training in 1993. I was supposed to go with my friend Kelly, who's in the audience, but he bailed on me. Anyway, so I served some time in the Ohio National Guard at the Piqua Armory. I left the Piqua Armory and went to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and served there for a while.